I had a miscarriage while I was at that job. And I will never forget, my first call that I made was not to my husband, but was to the executives at that company. And I've never spoken publicly about what happened, and I am right now. I was told verbatim, quite frankly, we are more concerned about the business on your East Coast. When can you get in a plane again? This is Off the Shelf, where we take the most iconic beauty brands, products, and people in the beauty industry off the shelf and examine the stories behind the story. It's where beauty is treated like the economic, cultural, and power-building force it really is. I'm Susannah Dellinger, and here we're going to talk about what really shapes the industry, who holds the power, how decisions get made, and what it actually takes to build, scale, and quite frankly, survive in beauty. These are the conversations happening behind closed doors about money, relationships, risk, and cult moments. If you're building, breaking through, or trying to understand how beauty really works, or just love a really good story, you're in the right place. Welcome back to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Susannah Dellinger. Whew. Today, we're going to do an episode that is far outside my comfort zone that I've been talked into doing by people that I love. And it's talking about myself, my background, my start in the beauty industry. And we're going to cover why I love beauty, why I started in beauty, and really the genesis of the term that I use all the time around beauty, which is making it up. Making it up is really, I would say, threefold meaning for me. First of all, making it up is I have always loved the idea that I could use beauty to change myself, to express myself, to make myself up into whoever I wanted to be. I'm a former theater major. I love the idea of slipping in and out of roles, of changing who I am on the outside to reflect how I feel at that time on the inside, and also the idea of how it helped my self-confidence. I am one of the most awkward people you will ever meet. I am almost 6 feet tall. I grew up closing car doors on my hands, tripping over my own 2 feet. I felt like a baby gazelle part of the majority of my teenage life. So the idea that I could use beauty to make myself appear more confident and more together than I actually ever was. Making it up also talks about how in beauty particularly, you do not have to have a background in beauty to become successful in beauty. You have to have a natural curiosity. You have to have a love for the industry. And I believe you have to have a deep-rooted passion to be successful. But outside of that, there are no rules. You can truly make it up. And then the third part of making it up is how on earth did I make it up the beauty ladder from somebody who talked my way into my first job behind a counter, all the way up to becoming an executive of one of the world's largest beauty brands, and then launching one of the world's largest beauty agencies without a business plan. How did I make it up that ladder? All right, so here we go. I fell in love with beauty at a very, very young age. And I would say it felt a little bit ridiculous that I would have the pages of Allure and Glamour and all those best of issues that would come out. I could tell you in October of 2003 at the time, what's the best concealer? Oh, it was Clé de Peau. Who has the best bronzer? Who has the best mascara? Oh my gosh, how I poured over those magazine pages. So when I left college, fun fact, I dropped out after 2 years as a theater major because quite honestly, it's not like they give a degree and say, congratulations, you now have a starring role. And I was going to make it on the big screen. I was going to make it in theater, but you have to support yourself outside of just being a broke auditioner full time. And you have a couple of choices. You can be a waitress, a bartender, a temp, etc. And I tried all of them until one day a friend of mine said, did you know that you can go work at a beauty counter and you can make just as much money as you do waitressing and they give you free beauty products? Hello, did I mention broke? And you could get me free Clé de Peau concealer, free Dior Show mascara. Where do I sign up? Well, it turns out you actually have to interview for these jobs behind the counter and convince people that you know what you're doing in beauty. I had never worked in beauty before. That did not stop me. I considered this one of my biggest auditions and roles of my life at that point when I was 23 years old. And I walked into Nordstrom on Michigan Avenue and said, is anybody hiring for a job here? And an assistant manager said, actually, we are, and sat down with me and asked me about my background, in which I completely exaggerated from my theater and modeling experiences, how much I had worked in beauty and how much experience I had doing makeup on others, which, spoiler alert, was none at the time outside of my friends. And for some reason, she moved me on to a second round interview with the brand. The brand was called Shiseido. It was a brand that I had never heard of at the time, but oh my gosh, did I research that role, honey. I went online and found that they had a poem behind Shiseido that encompassed their entire mission of how they viewed beauty. And could I deliver a line? I made sure that I had memorized that poem, and I showed up for my little interview at Nordstrom with the executive and coordinator, and they were asking me my typical, the typical questions you ask. Have you ever worked in beauty? Which retailers? And I could tell I was bombing because the answer to that was none, right? You can't make up an entire background. And I said, you know what? I haven't. But what really stuck with me about your brand, and then I went into the poem and I went into the philosophy, and I talked about the entire university that Shiseido had in Japan and their approach to the routine and ritual of beauty. Jaws dropped the floor. I am still friends with the account executive and coordinator to that day. Apparently, at that time, nobody else had ever gone on and memorized the poem for Shiseido. And now working in beauty all these decades later, I realized that what I demonstrated was an insane passion and curiosity around the brand. And you can't teach that. You either love it and live it and breathe it and eat it and sleep it, or you don't. And they took a chance on me. And I made sure that every day that I showed up at that counter, I was putting on little mini performances about what that brand stood for and showing them the facial massages that were unique to Shiseido and talking about the ingredient story. And the storytelling is what stuck with me and what really resonated to the fact that I thought I was going to get in trouble for playing with beauty. I was doing nothing but telling fun stories and showing products. And every time the department manager, his name was Anthony Tippins, would come around the corner, this regal 6'2" gorgeous man would come around the corner, I would drop a makeup brush and act like, oh, like I had done something wrong. And at one point, about a month and a half after starting, he took me aside and he said, you do realize this is your job and you're not going to be in trouble for actually playing with makeup. And I said, I still can't believe it. And so I quickly rose the ranks in the Nordstrom family. And I have to say that Nordstrom is one of the most amazing retailers you could ever start with to learn about retail, beauty, and how to really approach customers. And I became an assistant manager of, at that time, the largest cosmetic department for Nordstrom in the country in Chicago on Michigan Avenue. This was in the early 2000s. This was at a time when brands were being, required almost to do personal appearances in these stores. So we would have these beautiful brands, Scott Barnes, who was J.Lo's makeup artist at the time and did Body Bling, if anybody remembers that, or Janine LaBelle from Stila. We even had appearances from Naomi Campbell when she was doing a thing with MAC for MAC Viva Glam. And part of my job as the assistant manager, who was the only one without children in the department at the time, was to take these people to dinner afterwards. I was literally being paid to entertain people I was reading about in Allure and InStyle. And I was like wanting to throw up in the bathroom beforehand, but then think, okay, I can do this. And I would just go and be naturally curious and ask them questions and started to form real relationships in the beauty industry. All the way up until one of those brands called me one day and said, hey, we would like for you to become one of our national trainers. Well, in fact, they said, do you know anybody just like you? And at the time I was like, oh, let me make some calls. And God bless the person. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Do you know anybody just like you? Because they weren't allowed to recruit from the retailer. I was like, oh, it took me a minute for that one to land. Passionate, yes. Quick on the uptake, no, at that time. And so I quickly jumped into a role for Dr. Brandt Skincare, which at that time was run by Dr. Brandt himself, and got to meet the chemist behind the brand. And there was only 3 or 4 executives, and we split the country crisscrossing, going to Sephora's, training. They're called cast members, fun fact, employees. Talk about theater. Everything's on stage, off stage, cast. Training cast members on the technology behind Dr. Brandt Skincare, then flying to his headquarters in Miami, the same dermatology offices that Madonna was going to, and being paparazzi'd coming out. I was like, how is this my job, right? Like just loving every single minute of it. And then I got a call from Laura Mercier. And oh my gosh, how I love color. So the idea that an executive at Laura Mercier was interested in having me, do something very similar for that company was just a once in a lifetime dream. And I still remember the amount of dinners that I had with Laura Mercier, the luncheons that I got to have with her. They weren't several, but they were so impactful. I could count on my hand within the almost 8 years I was there. I would say I got to meet her and have meaningful conversations 5 times or less. But she would sit and she would talk about how she was addicted to true crime shows. And she would tell stories from her days on set with these celebrities and these insane things that would happen as she's climbing a tree to do some celebrities, body makeup on the cover of an album, and how somebody falls down and breaks an arm. And I'm sitting there with my jaw open, be like, I cannot believe I'm getting paid for this. Like, someone is paying me to hang out with Laura Mercier and hear about how she's fascinated by serial killers and what she's doing on Mariah Carey's legs. All in the same conversation. Like, pinch me. This was a dream come true. So I continued to rise up the ranks and got a call from a company, Trish McAvoy. Trish McAvoy herself called me and introduced herself and said she'd heard about me and was hiring for a job. And basically, congratulations, I work here now. And I was like, I wasn't really ever planning on leaving this other company. But Trish had created a role which really allowed me to spread my wings and start to run larger field teams. In each one of these jobs, I had been training. I had been having my own field teams go into stores, make impact, reach sales goals, etc. This was the first time I was going to have close to 100 people underneath me and my executives, and was an opportunity I could not pass. That role, it broke me in ways that I have talked about a little bit, but never really sat down to dive into. I was required to travel on a plane 48 weeks out of the year. And it sounded like the job a million girls would kill for, right? This was coincidentally right when Devil Wears Prada had come out as well. And I had a corporate expense account, and I was staying in Ritz-Carlton's and St. Regis's on corporate codes and racking up airline miles. I would cash in to go to Bora Bora. It literally looked like a dream from the outside. But what had gotten me there, my passion, my love of the industry, I was asked to behave in a way that was so polar opposite to that it really killed that passion and that love. It was so focused on results. It was so focused on people being, disposable if they were not delivering this bottom line number. While it taught me to look at beauty in a very analytical way, to be very focused on the top line and bottom line goals, it also taught me over those 5 years what I needed to hold on to in beauty, and that is the people. People are not disposable. People are what makes beauty one of the most special industries out there. The field teams in the stores, the people who show up every single day, right? It's like the postman, rain, snow, sleet. They're still showing up into the retailer to spread joy, to bring life to the beauty products. And if those people are treated poorly or act as if it does not matter what they do, then the heart and the soul of beauty really dies along with that. It took me 5 years to step away from that because it caused an identity crisis in me. If I am not Susannah Dellinger, the executive of this huge company, flying all across the country, speaking on stages to hundreds of women at trend shows, doing morning shows on TV, and being elevated as this national speaker on behalf of this beautiful brand, if I'm not that Susannah Dellinger, then who am I? At the same time, I was struggling with fertility. I'd been trying to have a baby for close to 10 years. Well, fun fact, if you travel 48 weeks out of the year, geographically, you should probably be in the same zip code as the person you're trying to create a human with. And I tried everything under the sun, every fertility treatment that there was, all the acupuncture, all the things. And I had a miscarriage while I was at that job. And I will never forget, my first call that I made was not to my husband, but was to the executives at that company. And I've never spoken publicly about what happened, and I am right now. I was told verbatim, quite frankly, we are more concerned about the business on your East Coast. When can you get in a plane again? It was Thanksgiving Eve. I was in Washington, D.C., and I was literally bleeding in the Ronald Reagan Memorial Hospital. There was gunshot victims there. And all I could hear was, you are only as good as your results. It was the same message that had been breaking me about what I was being asked to deliver to my team. And it had become my turn to experience you're only as good as your output. That was in November. By February, Valentine's Day, in fact, of 2018, my husband came home from work midday and told me, you've done enough. You've given enough of your body. You've given enough of yourself. You've done enough. It is time for you to step away. And I wanted to cry and throw up and to say, how on earth, like, who am I going to be if I do this? I had no backup plan. And he was like, you can just be you. You can just be Susannah and you'll figure it out. I said, well, I'm geographically not desirable. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I don't live in one of these major cities like New York or LA. Who on earth is ever going to work with me? And that's where the idea became, I could actually maybe just leave this behind, this identity of working for somebody else, and see what it's like to just be me. And if that could be enough. And so I did. I stepped away. And then I reached out to a little brand here in Charleston, South Carolina. It's an organic beauty brand that I used to buy secretly because I had actually signed a contract that said I could never use product that wasn't a certain brand I was working for. So I used to sneak these other products. And I reached out to them and I said, you know what? I will actually come and sweep your floors. I will answer your phones. I will send emails. I will do whatever you want. I just want to get to know you and I want to help you. This idea that maybe I could help emerging brands compete with these large brands that I had close to 17 years of working for. What if we could take that same power, that same type of field team, and put it behind brands that were really trying to make a difference with what they were doing? And I went and I started consulting for that brand. And I'll never forget, they told me, I sure as heck hope you never talk to blank. And they named another brand here in Charleston. And they said, because if that brand ever finds you, you're just going to be off to the races. And I had become pregnant. So I stepped away in February 2018. By April of 2018, I had become naturally pregnant after being told that that most likely would never happen. Well, it turns out my body threw a party, not being on a plane. Turns out it just wanted to be at home doing some beach yoga and hanging out. And I thought to myself, you know what? I want to show this baby on the way that you can make big swings and go for big things. And I reached out to that brand that I was told, I hope you never talk to them. I was like, I wonder why that person hopes that. And that led to a conversation that led to my second consulting client. And then it began to snowball from there. And I started my own consulting behind the scenes. So from 2018 to 2020, I spent about 2 years consulting with up-and-coming emerging beauty brands, whether that was on what retailers they should be in, on how to build a field team, even global expansion. I want to reiterate that I had no idea what I was doing. I knew how to do one thing, and that was to build great beauty teams and to train those teams and to drive to great goals. But did I know how to expand beauty brands into Asia, into Australia? No. But I did what I've always done, is I made it up. I was like, this seems like it should work. What if I just reached out to the retailer and told them how incredible these brands are? What if it's just storytelling? And spoiler alert, it was storytelling is what worked. In fact, one of the first brands that I did global expansion for asked me to slow down because they were not ready for the onslaught of retailers that started to reach out. I expanded that brand into 4 different countries in Asia, Australia, and the UK. And that was without knowing anything before on how to do it. Nowadays, sure, you can look it up and you can help. ChatGPT might guide you, but this was simply reaching out to retailers and connecting the brand story with the retailer's ethos. And it was a match made in heaven. Then the pandemic hit and everything halted. I had a toddler at home and I had stepped away because all of a sudden these beauty brands no longer had budgets. And I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do? And there was an app at the time, a social media app called Clubhouse. And it was amazing brand founders from all over the world just connecting and talking and about the things that I've always loved. And the natural curiosity in me was like, okay, I could either listen to Blue's Clues for the 150 millionth time with my toddler, or I can put in a headphone, and listen to Indy Lee and Josh Rosebook and Erica from Axiology and Michelle Lee, who's the editor-in-chief of Allure. I could listen to them talk about beauty. And true connection started happening because once again, I was just naturally curious and I would ask questions and I would share perspective. And some of these people would go onto LinkedIn and say, wait a second, reverse, you did what for who? Can I jump on a quick call? That became like my motto of 2020 was people saying, can I jump on a quick call? And of course, I was desperate to talk to other humans that were not my toddler or my husband as we were all at home in our living rooms. And I would start to answer questions about field sales and retailers and national distribution, et cetera. And I was asked by one of those brands, hey, would you happen to be able to refer some field team members to me? Of course, I knew great people looking for work. It was never this idea I was going to sit down and build an agency. I had no business plan. I just had some great people that I wanted to connect to these great brands. I wanted people to win. And I got this feeling when that happened of like, oh, this feels really good. Right? Like I'm helping these brands do some fun things. I'm helping my friends that I've known for, almost 20 years at this point, stay working. And that friend told a friend who told a friend that said, hey, Susannah knows some great people. And fun fact, they asked me, well, how much do you charge to find these people? $500 sounded right at the time. And I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to introduce people. We're not going to actually have an agency because then I'd have to figure out payroll and then I'd have to figure out all these things. I can just be the connector. And I had a really good friend at the time who was a consultant for other brands that were in fintech, and Netflix was one of his clients. And he's like, I'm going to come to Charleston and we're going to do something called an onsite. And we're going to put things on a board and we're going to see what you see. And him doing that and him pouring into me, I sat there in a room and I realized what was standing in my way of building an actual business, of building an actual agency, was this idea that that was for others. That was for people who knew what they were doing, who'd gone to business school. And yet I was letting it stop me when I never let it stop me before. And he was like, what would it look like if it were easy? And that one question unlocked so much in me. And so I just once again made it up. And I went and I hired people way smarter than me, which is the number one piece of advice I could give anybody, is to make sure that you're not the smartest person in the room. I hired the best payroll company out there. I hired the best HR companies out there. I hired the best legal teams, all the things so that I could free up myself to do the one thing I knew how to do, which was to take brand storytelling on a national level and teach that to team members to do it every day in and out. Since that 4 years ago, I've had the pleasure of working with over 45 brands like RMS Beauty, OG, Bubble Skincare, Indie Lee, Vintner's Daughter, the list goes on and on. I cannot believe that the same 23-year-old who dropped a makeup brush when her department manager would come around a corner because I thought like I was going to get in trouble for playing in makeup has now gone on to create an agency that has generated over $10 million of revenue in 48 months. And it's simply because of this idea that when you are passionate, when you're curious, when you're naturally inquisitive, great things can happen. And yet we sometimes get in our head and say that's for other people. And it took me almost 20 years until that stumbling block came to me when I could have said, oh, that's for somebody else who knows what they're doing. And I realized if you really want to make change in the world, you can't let those things stand in your way, or other people who maybe don't have the same love for the industry in their heart, who maybe don't have the same mindset, are going to go build it anyway. So what if we built something that put the field first, that put the people who are the storytellers, who put them as the whole center, whole enchilada of the industry, and inverted that pyramid structure? And that's what we've tried to build. That's what I've tried to build at Bright Beauty Connect. And it is what I hope to continue to build, is a place where we connect great people with great brands who do great things. And I will continue to make it up and hope that we can make change together. These conversations matter because who gets to speak shapes who gets to win. If this episode challenged how you see beauty, business, or the power behind the industry, share it with someone who needs to hear it. To connect or explore more, check the show notes. I'm Susannah Dellinger, and this has been Off the Shelf.